Hockey's a game of pride, precision, and unspoken grudges. And no one embodied that mix better than Ken Dryden, the towering mind behind the Montreal Canadiens dynasty. Calm, calculated, and almost untouchable, he faced every challenge with composure, almost everyone. Because beneath that mask, there were cracks, moments that made even Dryden's patience boil. A few rivals didn't just test his reflexes, they tested his soul. They taunted, crashed, scored, and smirked their way into his nightmares. These weren't ordinary opponents, they were obsessions. And today, we're revealing the 6 players Ken Dryden truly hated the most, and the rivalries that nearly broke the unbreakable man. Phil Esposito, the bruising scorer who wouldn't leave the crease. If Ken Dryden was the embodiment of composure, Phil Esposito was its living, breathing opposite. The Boston Bruins star center didn't play hockey. He waged war in the crease. Esposito was a storm in skates, a mix of brute force and stubborn willpower who turned every square inch of ice in front of Dryden into his personal battlefield. When the Canadiens met the Bruins in the early 1970s, it wasn't finesse against finesse. It was poetry versus punishment. And in that chaos, Esposito thrived. Boston's offense revolved around him not because of elegance, but because of his sheer defiance. While most forwards floated along the perimeter, Esposito planted himself right in Dryden's face. A 6-foot wrecking ball of elbows, screens, and stick jabs. He wasn't just scoring goals, he was invading Dryden's sanctum. Every rebound, every deflection was a test of nerves, and Dryden, ever the thinker, hated how primitive and effective Esposito's approach was. He wasn't outsmarting goalies, he was outlasting them. The Canadiens-Bruins rivalry was already explosive, but with Dryden and Esposito, it became psychological warfare. Dryden's stoic stance infuriated Esposito. Esposito's noise and motion rattled Dryden. When Boston's number 7 camped in front of the net, it was like setting off a controlled demolition. One shove, one rebound, one shove more. The 1971 playoffs were the perfect storm. Dryden, a rookie phenom, versus the mighty Bruins led by Esposito and Bobby Orr. Boston fired 48 shots on goal in Game 7, and still, somehow, Dryden held the line. Esposito, dripping in sweat and disbelief, later admitted, "We couldn't figure him out. He stopped everything, even the impossible." But respect didn't erase frustration. Over time, it turned to animosity. Every time Esposito jammed his stick into Dryden's pads, every time he screened him until the last second, the tension grew thicker. The two clashed, not just in spirit, but physically. Their collisions in the crease became legendary among fans and sports writers alike. That rivalry had its moments of psychological taunting. After scoring on a greasy rebound, Esposito would sometimes glance back at Dryden, a subtle grin through his mouthguard, as if to say, "Told ya." Cameras caught Dryden's glare as he lifted his mask slightly, took a deep breath, and turned away. But anyone watching could see it. The calm giant had cracked, even if just for a second. The truth was, Esposito represented everything Dryden wrestled with about hockey. The chaos, the recklessness, the lack of control. Yet that's also why the rivalry worked so perfectly. For every poised save, there was an elbow from Esposito. For every thoughtful pause, there was a shove to the chest. The two men embodied the eternal struggle between art and aggression. And every clash in front of that crease was a collision of hockey's two souls. Even years later, Dryden admitted Esposito changed the way he saw the game. He forced him to think differently, to adapt, to channel rage into calculation. But there was no denying the emotional toll. Montreal fans loved the duels. Boston fans lived for them. Because every time those two faced off, it felt like something bigger than a hockey game. It was intellect against instinct, mind against muscle. And on those nights when the forum lights glared and Esposito set up camp in Dryden's crease again, even the calmest man in hockey had to ask himself, how long can patience survive a storm? For the first time, the calm giant cracked, but that was only the beginning of his fury. Bobby Orr, the genius who made Dryden question reality. If Phil Esposito was the physical storm that battered Ken Dryden's patience, Bobby Orr was the lightning that struck through his logic. Orr didn't just play hockey, he redefined it. He wasn't a defenseman in the traditional sense. He was an artist who used the entire rink as his canvas, and every rush up the ice was a brush stroke of genius. Against Orr, Dryden wasn't just facing shots, he was facing imagination. Dryden was known for his intellect, a goalie who studied the game like a philosopher studies chaos. But Orr was chaos with purpose. The Boston Bruins number 4 didn't follow the rules of geometry or timing that goalies relied on. He moved like he knew where everyone would be 3 seconds before they got there. For a goaltender like Dryden, who prided himself on anticipation and control, that was maddening. You couldn't predict Bobby Orr. You could only react. And even that wasn't always enough. Their rivalry was built not on hatred, but on something more haunting. Fascination. Dryden admired Orr, but that admiration came with dread. In interviews years later, Dryden admitted that playing against Orr was like playing against the future. Every time Orr carried the puck, the rhythm of the game changed. The crowd's noise shifted, defenders panicked, and even Dryden, composed Dryden, felt his heartbeat speed up, because he knew that if Orr decided to make a move, nothing in hockey physics could stop him. During one unforgettable night in the early 1970s, Orr tore through the Canadiens' defense like they were standing still. It wasn't a highlight, it was an act of defiance. Starting behind his own net, Orr glided up the ice with impossible speed. One deke, two spins, a fake slap shot, and before Dryden could reset his stance, the puck was behind him. Top corner, glove side. Orr didn't celebrate. He just skated away, head down, like a man who expected nothing less of himself. The arena erupted. Dryden, frozen for half a second longer than usual, finally stood tall and looked out into the chaos. Later, in his trademark reflective tone, he said, "It didn't feel real, it felt supernatural." That goal wasn't just another point. It was a message. Orr was the one opponent who made Dryden feel human. Every time they met, it was intellect versus instinct. Dryden tried to study Orr's tendencies, but there were none. His skating broke every pattern. His decision-making ignored every convention. As a defenseman, Orr attacked like a forward. As a forward, he defended like a goaltender. It was like watching evolution happen in real time and being powerless to stop it. And yet, for all the frustration, Dryden couldn't bring himself to hate Orr the way he hated Esposito. This was different. It wasn't annoyance, it was awe. But that awe was its own kind of torment. When a man like Ken Dryden, analytical, disciplined, logical, faces someone who turns logic into illusion, it's more than competition. It's an existential crisis. Fans saw the brilliance. Dryden felt the dread. He later wrote that Orr made everyone else, including me, seem slower, smaller, and older. In an era filled with bruisers and brawlers, Orr's weapon was his mind, and it was sharper than any stick. Each time he crossed the blue line, Dryden knew he was moments away from another impossible highlight. It said that Orr didn't just beat you, he changed you. And for Ken Dryden, every game against him was a reminder that control is an illusion and perfection is fleeting. Orr was the one player who made Dryden question everything he thought he knew about goaltending and about himself. If Esposito got under his skin, Orr got inside his mind, and that was even harder to escape. If you love these old school rivalries, hit that like button. It helps keep hockey history alive. And tell me in the comments, which one of these clashes do you think rattled Dryden the most? Derek Sanderson, the mouthpiece of Boston? If Phil Esposito was the muscle and Bobby Orr was the mind, Derek Sanderson was the mouth of the Boston Bruins. And few players in NHL history weaponized words like he did. While Dryden fought battles of skill and psychology, Sanderson thrived on provocation. He didn't need to score to make an impact. All he had to do was talk. His confidence bordered on arrogance. His swagger legendary. In a league full of silent warriors, Sanderson was the rock star who strutted onto the ice as if he owned it. In the 1970s, the Bruins were loud, brash, and unapologetically physical, and Sanderson was the amplifier. Known for his slick hair, sharp suits, and nightlife headlines, he was as famous off the ice as he was on it. But on the ice, his words cut deeper than his slapshot. He chirped relentlessly, targeted stars, and specialized in a psychological warfare. When Boston and Montreal faced off, his favorite target wasn't Guy Lafleur or Serge Savard. It was the tall, calm figure in the Canadiens' crease, Ken Dryden. Dryden was the antithesis of everything Sanderson represented. Where Sanderson was flamboyant, Dryden was philosophical. Where Sanderson thrived on chaos, Dryden studied it. But that difference only made the verbal assaults more effective. Sanderson didn't just want to beat Dryden, he wanted to crack him. And for a man who prided himself on self-control, that was the ultimate challenge. During one heated matchup at the old Boston Garden, Sanderson skated past the crease after a whistle and leaned in close. Cameras couldn't catch what he said, but teammates later recalled the taunt. "You think too much, Dryden? Maybe try stopping the puck instead." The crowd roared, sensing the rare tension bubbling behind Dryden's stoic mask. Dryden didn't respond. He never did. But inside, that comment stuck like a splinter. Sanderson's antics extended beyond the ice. He used the media like another weapon, taking jabs in interviews that felt designed to embarrass. In one Boston Globe piece, he quipped, "Dryden's not really a goalie. He's a lecturer with pads." Reporters loved it. Fans ate it up. For Dryden, who valued dignity and intellect, it was the kind of public humiliation that words couldn't defend against. He'd been mocked for his brain, for his calmness, for being different in a sport that glorified brute emotion. But everyone has a breaking point. That moment came late in the 1972 season after a gritty, penalty-filled Boston-Montreal showdown. Sanderson had spent the entire night buzzing around the crease, chirping after whistles, smirking after misses. Boston won, and Sanderson made sure to remind the cameras who he thought was responsible. Dryden's too busy writing books in his head to stop a rebound. This time, Dryden didn't stay silent. Reporters approached him post-game expecting the usual dry, polite commentary. Instead, he looked straight into the cameras and delivered a line that stunned the hockey world. Some players play the game, others just talk about it. That was it. No shouting, no insult, just precision. The kind of controlled burn that only Dryden could deliver, and it hit harder than any punch. For once, Sanderson was out-chirped by silence, sharpened into a sentence. The hockey community buzzed for weeks. Montreal fans called it poetic justice. Boston fans called it a lucky quip. But both sides agreed. The war of words between the calm scholar and the loud provocateur had become personal. Behind the scenes, even Dryden's teammates noticed a change. He'd always been analytical, but after Sanderson, there was an edge, a quiet defiance. Sanderson had forced him out of his comfort zone, dragged him into the mud, and for the first time, Dryden didn't mind getting dirty. The rivalry wasn't about saves or goals anymore. It was about ego. Two men, two philosophies clashing in public view. And while Sanderson would later admit respect for Dryden's intelligence, there was no denying the mark he left. For years, whenever someone brought up the Canadiens-Bruins rivalry, fans remembered not just the hits or the goals, but the words. Because in a sport built on silence and strength, Derek Sanderson proved that talk could bruise too. It wasn't Sanderson's stick that cut deepest, it was his mouth. But Dryden's patience wouldn't last forever. Reggie Leach, the silent sniper who spoke through goals. If Derek Sanderson weaponized his words, Reggie Leach didn't need any. He let his stick do the talking. And for Ken Dryden, that silence was somehow far more terrifying. Leach wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, and he didn't chirp. He was quiet, deadly quiet. They called him the Riverton Rifle for a reason. His shot was a blur, his release invisible, and his accuracy devastating. In the 1976 Stanley Cup Finals, that silence turned into a storm, and Dryden, the master of composure, faced one of the few opponents who could truly unnerve him without ever saying a word. The Philadelphia Flyers came into those finals as the embodiment of chaos, the Broad Street Bullies. All fists, intimidation, and muscle. But Leach didn't fit that mold. While his teammates brawled and taunted, Leach stayed detached, patient, waiting for his moment. That's what made him so lethal. Dryden later wrote that facing Leach was like waiting for thunder you couldn't see coming. Every shift, he seemed to appear from nowhere. Stick cocked, eyes cold, and release faster than reaction. In Game 1 of the series, Leach scored twice, both on shots that Dryden barely saw. They weren't dirty goals. They weren't lucky bounces. They were clean, perfect, surgical. By Game 2, it was clear Montreal could contain the Flyers' goons, but they couldn't contain him. Leach had already become a phenomenon that spring, scoring in 9 straight playoff games and setting records that stood for decades. But against Dryden, the goalie of the decade, the thinker who solved everyone, he was unsolvable. What rattled Dryden wasn't just the scoring, it was the way it happened. Most scorers gave away their intent. A glance, a stick angle, a body shift. Leach gave nothing. His wrist shot came out of nowhere, like a gunshot in the dark. Dryden couldn't predict it, couldn't read it, couldn't analyze it. It went against everything he believed in. That preparation and observation could outthink talent, but Leach's talent was pure instinct. And instinct doesn't reveal patterns. By the third game, Dryden's patience began to fracture. The Canadiens were winning the series, but every time Leach touched the puck, the air in the forum tensed. And then it happened again. Another wrist shot from the right circle, rising and cutting through the air like a whisper. It beat Dryden high glove, the one weakness scouts rarely dared to exploit. The red light flashed, and as Leach skated away, he didn't raise his arms or pump his fist. He just turned toward the bench expressionless, head down. That moment stuck with Dryden for years. No celebration, no smirk, no sound, just silence. And that silence was deafening. Later, in one of his reflective interviews, Dryden admitted, Leach didn't gloat, didn't speak, didn't even look back. It was like being haunted by silence. That was the moment that broke through Dryden's intellectual armor. He'd been beaten by emotion before, by anger, by taunts, by brute force, but never by nothing. Leach made him realize that the most unnerving opponent isn't the loud one. It's the one who doesn't need to say a thing. Every game after that, Dryden would watch the right wing carefully, knowing Leach could appear like a ghost, strike once, and vanish again into the flow of play. The Canadiens would go on to sweep the series and reclaim the Stanley Cup, but even victory couldn't erase the sting. Leach won the Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP, despite being on the losing team. That fact alone spoke volumes. It wasn't about banners or celebrations. It was about the memory of a man who had turned scoring into silence, and silence into a weapon. Dryden faced dozens of snipers in his career, but none lingered in his mind quite like Reggie Leach. Because while others barked or bullied, Leach left nothing behind except the echo of pucks off the netting. No words, no taunts, just goals. And Dryden could hear every one of them. Guy Lafleur, the rival in his own locker room. For most goalies, the hardest battles came from across the ice. For Ken Dryden, one of the fiercest came from inside his own dressing room. His name was Guy Lafleur, Montreal's golden-haired superstar, a man whose talent seemed touched by something divine. But for all the Grace fans saw under the form lights, there was a darker, sharper tension that brewed behind closed doors. Lafleur didn't just elevate the Canadiens. He pushed Dryden to the breaking point. Their relationship was complex, forged in mutual brilliance and quiet resentment. Dryden was the mind. Lafleur was the instinct. One studied the game like an architect, the other felt it like an artist. In practice, those worlds collided. Every morning skate, every shooting drill turned into a silent duel. Lafleur's release was lightning fast, almost casual, the kind of shot that made even great goaltenders question physics. For Dryden, who thrived on analysis, Lafleur was both a gift and a curse. He forced Dryden to sharpen every angle, every reaction, every ounce of control. But beneath the calm professionalism, there was a flicker of something else. Envy, maybe, or irritation. Because no matter how good Dryden was, Lafleur could make him look human. Teammates used to whisper that practices felt like playoff games. Lafleur would skate wide, slow down just enough to lull Dryden, then snap a laser top corner and grin, almost apologetically, as he circled back. He wasn't trying to embarrass anyone, but his talent did. You couldn't relax around him, a teammate once said. He made you better, or he broke you. As the Canadiens dynasty rolled through the 1970s, the balance between them became part of the team's identity. Dryden anchored the back end, Lafleur electrified the front. But every save Dryden made in games started with something harder, stopping Lafleur in practice. The quiet rivalry sharpened both men to near perfection. It was unspoken, professional, until one day it wasn't. During a late-season practice in 1976, the team was scrimmaging after a long road trip. Dryden was tired, mentally drained. Lafleur, as usual, was buzzing with energy, effortless, focused, deadly. On one rush, he broke past the defense and ripped a wrist shot, high glove side. It hit the crossbar, and in a perfect strike. The sound echoed through the empty forum. Lafleur didn't celebrate. He just circled, nodded once, and reset at center ice. On the next play, it happened again. Same spot, same motion, same result, another top corner rocket. This time, Lafleur didn't even look at Dryden. The goalie stood frozen, jaw tight behind his mask. The silence was heavier than shouting. A few teammates smirked nervously. They could feel the tension. That was the shock moment. The instant when the rivalry between teammates turned personal. Dryden didn't yell, didn't slam his stick. He just stood there, breathing slowly, absorbing it. Later that day, he wrote in his notebook, "Greatness doesn't ask for permission." It was respect wrapped in frustration, because Lafleur reminded him of the one thing he couldn't control: genius. Off the ice, their respect never faded, but their dynamic remained chilly. They weren't enemies, but they weren't friends either. They didn't need to be. Their connection was something rarer. Two titans who only became better because the other existed. Lafleur's fire forced Dryden's calm to evolve. Dryden's intellect forced Lafleur's artistry to stay sharp. Together, they embodied the perfect storm of Montreal's dynasty. Beauty and discipline, chaos and control. Fans saw unity. Only insiders saw the edge. Every spectacular Lafleur goal in a real game carried the shadow of those practice battles. And every big save Dryden made under the lights carried the memory of those silent duels at dawn. Even in victory, Dryden couldn't relax because his toughest rival dressed 10 feet away. Mike Bossy. The dawn of a new era. By the late 1970s, Ken Dryden had nothing left to prove. 6 Stanley Cups, a reputation as one of the game's greatest thinkers, and a dynasty that seemed untouchable. He was hockey's calm philosopher in pads, the man who made chaos look controllable. But as every era eventually learns, time doesn't wait for greatness. And when Mike Bossy burst onto the scene with the New York Islanders, Dryden suddenly found himself staring at something he'd never faced before: the future. Bossy was different from the bruisers and brawlers of Dryden's prime. He wasn't interested in intimidation or taunting. He was pure precision, a player who could turn a half-second opening into a masterpiece. His shot wasn't just fast, it was surgical. The release, almost invisible. He was smooth, efficient, terrifyingly accurate. Where older stars had to fight for their inches, Bossy made the ice seem infinite. To Dryden, it must have felt like deja vu. Another sniper with Reggie Leach's calm and Guy Lafleur's beauty, but now sharper, younger, and hungrier. Their early duels were subtle at first. A few games during Bossy's rookie season in 1977-78. Dryden, nearing retirement, had seen every kind of opponent imaginable. But when Bossy scored 53 goals in his debut season, it wasn't just another rookie record. It was a declaration. The NHL was changing. Gone were the days when goalies could intimidate forwards with presence alone. Bossy didn't care who was in the net. He treated every goaltender the same, as a puzzle to be solved. Dryden's trademark composure was tested again in those games against the emerging Islanders. Bossy had a knack for finding soft spots, for sliding into space before anyone noticed. He'd linger quietly on the wing, drifting almost lazily, then strike like lightning. For the first time in years, Dryden found himself second-guessing. Bossy didn't rush. He waited, and that patience, that almost surgical calm, felt eerily familiar. It was the same kind of composure Dryden himself had built a career on. Now it was being used against him. The turning point, the shock, came during one of their final meetings. It was late in the regular season, a playoff preview that felt heavier than the standings suggested. The Islanders were rising, the Canadiens still dominant. The crowd knew this matchup was more than a game. It was a passing of the torch in slow motion. Late in the third, tied at 2, the puck found Bossy at the right circle. He didn't wind up. He didn't hesitate. One flick, effortless, almost casual, and the puck was in the net before Dryden's glove even twitched. Bossy didn't roar or taunt. He just lifted his arms almost quietly, while the crowd exploded. On the other end of the ice, Dryden leaned on his stick for a long moment, eyes locked on the scoreboard. It wasn't anger in his expression. It was understanding. That goal wasn't just a tally, it was a message. The game was moving forward, and this time, it wouldn't wait for him to catch up. After that season, Dryden retired. He left the game on top, still a champion, still respected, but in his quieter moments, he couldn't ignore the symbolism. Bossy was everything the new NHL would become. Fast, technical, offense-driven, unshakable. The calm thinker had given way to the silent executioner. Years later, Dryden would describe Bossy's talent as the kind you can't stop, only witness. It was less rivalry, more revelation, the realization that even legends have an expiration date. Bossy didn't dethrone Dryden out of spite. He did it simply by being next. And as the puck rippled the mesh and Bossy lifted his arms, Dryden knew this wasn't defeat. It was the torch passing, and his time had finally run out. Hockey has always been more than just a game of goals. It's a battle of wills, of pride, and of legacy. And for Ken Dryden, every rivalry told a story. From Phil Esposito's chaos to Bobby Orr's genius. From Derek Sanderson's mouth to Reggie Leach's silence. From Guy Lafleur's brilliance in practice to Mike Bossy's emergence. As the new era, each opponent tested a different part of him. Behind that stoic mask, Ken Dryden battled 6 men who each revealed a different side of him. His pride, his limits, his legacy. So now it's your turn. Which rivalry do you think burned the deepest? Drop your thoughts below. And as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next game.